Welcome to Cinemapile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemaphilepod.com. In this terrific documentary film, The Other Roe, it uncovers the powerful and long overlooked story behind Doe V Bolton, an historic Supreme Court case that was decided on the same day as Roe v. Wade. It has largely been erased from public memory. While Roe became a national symbol, Doe quietly provided a broader legal framework that shaped the reproductive rights for a generation. Just a beautifully done documentary film. It enlightens and broadens our perspective on why Roe was such an important decision. We're joined today by the director, Wendy Eley Jackson, as well as the executive producer, and the daughter of Margie Pitts Hames, and that would be Donia Hames Robinson. Wendy Eley Jackson and Donia Hames Robinson, welcome to Cinemafile.
Thank you.
It's a short documentary film. It packs a lot of information and character development, if you will, into a short period of time. You really get an overview of why this is a significant event, not only in terms of the law, but in terms of our culture. I'd say, Donia, in terms of your desire to tell your mom's story, what was it that put you in touch with Wendy?
Yeah, this was kind of a conversation between my mother's best friend, Ann Rose, who's also one of the producers on our film. She and I, once Dobbs happened and Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton were overturned, we thought, oh gosh, we got to do something. What do we do? And this was, of course, in the middle of the pandemic, so we didn't have really access. We didn't know what we were doing. We thought everything would be on Zoom, and it wasn't. So we finally thought, we need somebody who really actually knows what they're doing. And a high school girlfriend of mine said, you know, Wendy Eley Jackson's in your city. I had no idea. Wendy and I went to middle school together. And so a high school buddy put us back in touch with each other, and it was a perfect fit.
Wendy Eley Jackson, tell me a little bit about when she approached you. What were you thinking? Did you know much about this prior to her approaching you?
I knew nothing. And I too, Donia and I are both from Atlanta, and it shows you how much erasure is happening. I'd never heard of the case, and Donia shared the significance of the case, but then she hit me with, and by the way, it was my mother that argued the case. Donia and I are actually born just a few days apart. We're girls born in 1970, telling our age, but we don't look it. But I would have thought at some point, with all of, have always prided myself on being an advocate as well as a scholar of history, civil rights, and human rights. It blew me away. And then understanding the differences between the two and how and why our SCOTUS had to have them together. It blew me away, and I was like, this is the story that we definitely should tell.
Well, and further into what you just said, I mean, obviously I was aware of Roe and the importance, the impact it had. No idea about this case prior, but why it ties together and sort of buttresses what you just said, why it's such an important legal development that they were decided essentially at the same time. So let's talk about what Doe did in relation to what Roe established.
Roe and Doe being sister companion cases, the court realized that they really wanted to take some of these rights cases and put them into a federal protected space. For example, civil rights. The states were not doing right by people, so they took it in hand to actually make national decisions. This was the same sort of thing that they did with abortion. This was really one of those things where certain states were not following the letter of the law or abusing the law. Mm-hmm. So Georgia, for example, was saying you could have an abortion, but you had to go through a gauntlet of 6 different doctors to have you checked out for an abortion to say that they would be okay with that. You had to go in front of a panel of judges to determine whether or not you were okay to have an abortion. You had to have a psychiatric evaluation. All of this takes a lot of time, and by the time they go through all of it, they were hurdles that would keep the woman from actually being able to access her right. So Doe was a case that came along that really helped to open and elucidate that. Roe establishes a right where Doe actually says, and the states can't get in the way. You can't legislate or put jurisdictional restrictions in front so that it makes hurdles for women to be able to have their rights. Doe actually also was really broad with their definition of health and challenged at the Supreme Court level what health actually means, and broaden it instead of just being physical health, emotional, financial, all different types of, how does this affect the woman's life in a larger concept? And so that's why it was also brought in as a class action lawsuit, so it could explain not only for one individual's rights, but to say that this matters to an entire class of individuals. And so it was a pretty powerful case. That's why it's a little surprising that it's been kind of ignored by history, or, in my opinion, it's been systematically covered up.
And can I say yes? And I was thinking about this yesterday. Roe really becomes more symbolic, right? It's shorter. Some people thought it was easier to pronounce and easier to mobilize politically, where Doe is actually more technical because it deals with hospital privileges, procedural restrictions, medical discretions, but the technical decisions often carry the most enormous consequences. So public memory always prefers simplicity. That's the way we do things.
Right.
And so Roe becomes the headline, but Doe becomes that fine print. And sometimes the fine print determines the lived experience. And so that is what you see.
Now, I have no idea if it was something that the Supreme Court came to learn over the course of the last 100 years before the decision on Roe, but there have been many cases throughout the history of the country where people had a right, but they couldn't exercise the right due to structural barriers, right? Going back to civil rights, going back to Reconstruction, right? There was a lot of rights granted or expanded, but practically are impossible to carry through. So would that be a fair assessment of, do you think, why they took this case on and sort of made clear that yes, it's a right and there's access to that ability to exercise, right?
Speaks to access. You can't. If you look at Roe as a headline, you have to understand that Doe is the architecture.
Yeah.
Roe is an articulated right.
Yeah.
Doe defined its operational meaning. So together, 50 years of jurisprudence, right?
That's what makes this so illuminating and so really so important for people to understand. And the film gets obviously into the life of your mother in more of a public way. I have to ask the question, I don't know if this is any thoughts of expanding the story of her life into something beyond what we see in this film? Seems like she lived quite an interesting life, quite an impactful life. Does this given you a sort of the sense that maybe there's more of an expanded version of telling her story, Donia?
Yeah, absolutely. And originally what we had wanted to do, because Mom was such a character, and she's been called swashbuckling by the New York Times. So she was very much a character, let me tell you. But we had started out truly wanting to do a feature, and we're geared up to do that. The hard thing is trying to raise money for a movie in an election year, and this specifically a few years ago, that election year. And since then, it's been very hard to raise money. So it's kind of one of those where people are really on the edge of their seats, and the arts have suffered quite a bit, but we're doing our best to tell the story in the medium that we can. And we're hoping, of course, that somebody might sort of think, hey, there's a lot more to this story. We've got a few other stories we want to tell and expand as much as we can on the subject.
Part that we're focused on in this film is incredibly important. And when we see her in the film, she's obviously a very accomplished public speaker, able to articulate what she meant in terms that would be understandable. I put quotes around that to anyone who was listening to her. She had a kind of a force of nature kind of bearing about her. And also there's a few other things that are brought into the conversation in this film, The Other Roe, the kind of the fireworks that were around this case, and since then, and obviously we with Dobbs we see decimation of abortion rights in this country. But also the hopeful side is that every time this has been put on the ballot, I think almost without exception, it has been passing that expanding the rights of women access to abortion has been more or less, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think all of these initiatives have passed at the statewide levels around the country. So it bodes well for the future, and hopefully at some point there'll be a more reasonable Supreme Court. And I'm being kind when I say it that way.
And Mike, one of the things I was thinking about, the fact that, yeah, needless to say, you have thousands of followers. The other thing that we wanted to make sure that we do. So often journalists have been citing the wrong case. They start talking about the healthcare providers, and that's not Doe, that's Roe. So it is.
Do you want me to ask you a question that I'll just edit into the?
Yeah, I think.
How do you want me to? What do you want me to do here? Because I'd be more than happy to.
I think in my mind, I want people to understand, and we've talked about it on why Doe versus Bolton matters, right?
Yeah.
And because they need to understand the citation of Roe has to deal with the woman's right, but Doe is essential because it really defines how access functions in practice, right? Roe only addresses the constitutional question. Doe addresses the implementation of hospital requirements, medical judgment, barriers that can either expand or constrict access. And so when you simplify history into one headline, you flatten it. And when you flatten history, you lose the nuance, and the film insists on nuance, as well as the rights of the American people. They need to understand how do you reconstruct and re-implement a law? Well, if you don't know that one exists, it makes it very difficult. And by bringing this to the masses, the public masses, now the citation of the correct case can be made, and constitutional lawyers or those that forgot about it since they were in law school, now they have something to work on.
And I'm wondering, just should there be included in these statewide initiatives all over the country, should there be more attention paid to what you just said in terms of if they're going to write a law to legalize abortion in these different states? Is that being addressed in these? Have you seen initiatives that are taking into account what you just described, or are they not?
Well, I believe there probably are some states that have started to unravel this, but needless to say, there are so many cases just around our everyday lives that lawyers, the ACLU, everyone is taking up. I believe there's some, but not enough, because when you're dealing with constitutional law and reproductive health care, the margin for error is actually zero. So we've worked diligently to ground every assertion in documentation. And so beyond the legal accuracy, there's also a moral responsibility to portray individuals in their own legal battles, not as symbols, but as human beings navigating these complex realities. And so in a time of book erasure, recompense of how they want to get rid of different things and tell us all lies, this documentary, along with others like it, are the translators of history. And I think that's what the collaboration of this team has been able to do. We've been able to translate history, and translation requires precision. So on both fronts, legal as well as being able to document it. And I think we're starting to prick the conscience of both genres.
I'm just curious, is it feasible, the Supreme Court moving forward with some sort of change to the people who are on the court, could they engineer a decision that highlighted Roe and discounted Doe? Is that something that could happen? I mean, how do you prevent something like that from happening?
Well, being that I am a liberal arts humanities person,
Donia?
in the words of Sam Cooke, we all hope a change is going to come is not a song, that it can be a spiritual and moral declaration. But we are at a time where our democracy, and as you saw in the documentary, Andrea Young, who is actually the daughter of Ambassador Andrew Young and lieutenant of Martin Luther King, she says that, at the time when I'm doing this interview, we're in democracy. So we're hoping that the conversation can capture what the film does, which is the tension between suffering and hope, delay and inevitability, and that it continues to resonate across generations, because I don't know if it will happen in our generation.
Wow.
But I'm hoping
Donia, do you share that perspective, or what do you?
Absolutely. And I'm going to take it a little step further because I get to be the activist in the crowd and because I'm the one who has the least to lose. So for me, what I want to point out is that there are the powers that be, whoever they may be, they are systematically going through and erasing actual history, women's history, history of color, people of color, and they are actually erasing this from, they're taking the plaques off the buildings. They're taking the citation and notations of court cases, even out of the Supreme Court, and hiding them. It was very difficult for me to find information about Roe versus Wade plus Doe versus Bolton. And I really had to work quite hard to find anything about Doe versus Bolton because there has been an erasure happening that they're hoping nobody's going to look, nobody's going to notice. I mean, it sounds kind of conspiracy theory and everything, but I'm not trying to sound paranoid, but I'm sort of shouting out that we're actually dealing with this, and we're seeing it in the news today of how much this administration and the powers that be are erasing history. It's not a good look for the country, in my opinion.
I just saw something yesterday. It's a little off topic, but maybe not, in which the Trump administration has taken out all of the references to some sort of manual or reference documents on climate, on climate regulations, the science of climate, just taking them out of this, I guess, this place where judges go to look for references and or more information. It's gone.
They're trying to take information that makes a certain part of the population feel uncomfortable, and they're deleting it all, which is revisionist history. It's just the definition of revisionist history.
Yeah.
That's a way of control, and it's a way of causing continued suffering for those who are trying to just find equality.
And in furtherance of the point that you're making, we see the footage around the 1988 Republican Convention when Operation Rescue appeared and made a splash in terms of the national conversation on abortion and the chaos that they created and the hysteria and misinformation. We see how that has played out over these many years, culminating, well, not even culminating, but certainly another example of that is the recent footage from Governor Phil Bryant that essentially makes an abortion unachievable in terms of a woman's right to make that decision. Well, congratulations on it. I hope that people will seek this out. Donia, are you looking at other festivals, hopefully other festivals coming up?
We've got our fingers crossed and our eyes set for many, many other festivals.
Good.
I think we submitted to about 35 or 40 of them by now. For me, the real mission is to get the information out.
Yeah.
And so the best way to do that is kind of like a dandelion, spread it far and wide. We have our eyes on Tribeca. We have our eyes, of course, in Austin and Atlanta. So we've got our fingers crossed, and we're just hoping for some good turnouts.
Well, Margie Pitts Hames was a woman to be reckoned with, certainly pointing in the right direction in history and in the expansion of civil rights for all of us. So my hat's off to her and for her life, and to both of you for bringing it to my attention. And it looks like many, many, many more people moving forward to its festival run and beyond. I look forward to more. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're very welcome. We have been talking to the director of the Other Roe, that would be Wendy Eley Jackson, and the executive producer and the daughter of Margie Pitts Hames, that would be Donia Hames Robinson. To both of you, thank you so very much for spending some time with us here on Cinemaphile. You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.